Good evening, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here. We're going to give participants another 4 minutes to get started. Um, just allow some people to kind of join the Zoom before we begin our session for tonight. But thank you all for being here. We'll give people about 30 more seconds to join before we get started. Alrighty, well, welcome everybody to tonight's Ag-Cademy session. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Yara Amar, and I'm one of the communications officers at Helen's Daughters. Tonight, we are here for our fourth Ag-Cademy session. But we're joined tonight by Mr. Julius Polius. Um, but before we get started, there are a couple Zoom features I want to point out for tonight. First, if you take a look at the chat box on your toolbar, this is where we'll post any relevant information and links throughout the program. The chat box will be on for the duration of this program. However, it will be unmonitored. So if you have any questions, we won't see it if you put it in the chat. You must put it in the Q&A box, which is also located on your toolbar at the bottom of your screen. This is where you can submit any questions throughout the program, and messages submitted will only be seen by the speaker and myself, and we'll do the best that we can to answer as many of your questions as possible at the end of the program. Finally, this program is including closed captioning, which you can turn on and off by clicking the closed caption or CC icon on your toolbar. However, please note that if you're using a tablet or smartphone, you may need to turn the captions on in your Zoom settings. Now, just a reminder, the chat is open, but we are not monitoring the chat. So please, please be mindful and kind to everybody in the chat box. Now it is my pleasure to welcome our speaker, Mr. Julius Polius. Mr. Julius Joseph Nicholas Polius is a St. Lucian agronomist, soil scientist, natural resources management specialist, and project management professional with more than 4 decades of leadership and technical experience in agriculture, environmental management, and rural development across the Caribbean. He has dedicated his career to advancing sustainable agriculture production, soil fertility management, land resource conservation, and institutional development, while contributing significantly to agricultural policy and capacity building in St. Lucia and the wider region. Mr. Polius earned a Bachelor of Science with honors in agriculture from the University of the West Indies and a Master of Science in soil science, soil fertility, and plant nutrition specifically from McGill University in Canada. Throughout his career, he has complemented his academic qualifications with professional training in project management, agricultural research management, soil plant analysis, fertilizer technology, gender mainstreaming, technical and vocational education and training, and natural resources management. His extensive professional career includes service as Permanent Secretary and Director of Agriculture in the Government of St. Lucia, Executive Director of the St. Lucia Agricultural Diversification Agency, Soil Scientist with the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute, Consultant Agronomist for the World University Services of Canada, and Technical Officer with the Banana Industry Trust. He currently serves as an independent consultant in natural resources management, providing technical expertise in soil science, agronomy, land evolution, project design, agricultural development, and environmental management throughout the Caribbean. His core areas of expertise include soil quality management, plant nutrition, fertilizer management, crop production, soil-water relations, project management, and sustainable land development. Beyond his technical work, Mr. Polius has made significant contributions to agricultural governments and institutional strengthening. He has served in numerous leadership roles, including Chairman of the Standards Council of St. Lucia, Chairman of the Pesticides Board Control, President of the Windward Islands National Farmers Association, President of the St. Lucia National Fair Trade Association, and member or chair of several national agricultural and natural resource committees. He also participated in the United Nations negotiations that led to the establishment of the Cartagena Protocol in biosafety, reflecting his engagement in international agricultural and environmental policy. As an accomplished educator and researcher, Mr. Polius has served as an adjunct lecturer in soil science at the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College since 1987 and has authored numerous technical reports and publications on soil fertility, land capability, irrigation, agricultural research, and land degradation. His outstanding service to agriculture has been recognized through several prestigious awards, including the Government of St. Lucia's Recognition Award for Significant Contributions to Agricultural Development and Soil Science and the St. Lucia Public Service Long Service Award. He continues to be a respected advisor, mentor, and advocate for sustainable agriculture, helping farmers, institutions, and development agencies improve productivity while conserving the natural resource base for future generations. Please welcome me in welcoming Mr. Julius Polius. Mr. Polius, if you want to turn your camera on, there you go.
Okay, thank you very much. I can go ahead now, yeah?
Yes, go for it.
Yeah, thanks very much and good evening to all. What a long introduction. Nevertheless, I'm happy to be here and prepared to engage you, the audience, in in the discourse on soil health and its management, with a bit of a Caribbean perspective to it, right? Um, am I seeing the slides?
No, you need to reshare your screen.
I need to reshare. Okay. Uh, yes. Am I okay now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, and it's a distinct pleasure to be here, and I hope that my presentation would be interesting. I'm sure a lot will come out with your questions, um, but nevertheless, I look forward to delivering the best I can. Okay. Okay, by the end of this session, I would want to leave with you that you would know what is a soil and where it comes from, have an awareness of the core soil processes, understand what soil health means, identify common problems in Caribbean farming systems as far as soil is concerned, recognize the importance of soil physical, chemical, and biological properties as far as soil health is concerned, and apply some practical soil management techniques to improve the productivity and sustainability of soil. And also understand in a brief way how climate and farming practices affect soil health in the Caribbean. Okay, I have a, 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 a picture here. It's a bit of an icebreaker for me. Here is this farmer who's heading in a direction. They had two pathways, one to the forest, one to the farm. Can anybody tell me which pathway he or she may be taking with this bag of fertilizer and why? Um, I would entertain 5 responses. So you put up your hand and you speak. There's June Lewis. There's somebody has their hand up.
I would say she's going to the farm
He's going to the farm. Why is she going to the farm?
because she seemed to have fertilizer for corn.
For corn. Okay. Somebody else?
I agree she may be going to the farm. Why I think she going not in the forest because the forest, if it's a healthy forest, make its own fertilizer by the decomposting of the leaf and branches. So there's our own system there, but in the farm we have to maybe add something.
Okay. Somebody else? Number 3? Anybody else?
Yeah, I would like to support that she's going to the farm because you don't carry fertilizers to the forest. The forest has its natural regenerative processes. So it is more customary to add fertilizer to a farm situation.
Okay. 2 more responses, please.
Good evening. I believe that she's going to the farm because I don't think people are allowed to cultivate crops and add fertilizer in the forest.
Mm-hmm.
I think the forest is most likely a protected area for the water table and so on. So I don't think she's going to the forest.
Okay.
Can I say something? Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with everything everybody else said, but I just have a different perspective,
Yeah,
and it
please
has
go
to
ahead.
do with it has to do with the signs. One is pointing to the farm, one is pointing to the forest. and she's facing in direction of the farm. So in addition to, yes, she's carrying the fertilizer and all the reasons that were given, I agree with them. But it's just this simple thing I'm adding, just direction.
Oh, direction. Okay. It may be with
Yeah.
the graphic. It may be with the graphics. But the
That
intention
yeah.
was that she would have been in
Mhm.
the middle of the road, deciding in
Mhm.
which direction she would go.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Okay, but we will come back to this a little later, because as I make the presentation, we will see the relevance of farm vis-a-vis forest and what happens in these two places as far as soil health is concerned. Okay, the first thing I want to introduce to you is the 7 plant growth factors. And regardless of where the plant is growing, there are 7 factors that is going to lead to a yield or a production, right? There's an A factor. I will explain to you why it is there. So your plant require water, it require oxygen, sunlight, heat, carbon dioxide, mechanical support, and nutrients. No matter where you are, China, Australia, or Martinique, St. Vincent, these 7 elements must be involved in growing a crop. And when I showed you this little picture here, the forest takes care of these first 7 factors. But when we talk of the farm, we have to have an if factor, which is management. So I think all of you are correct. This person is heading towards the farm because of what is happening at the farm. So while nature, the forest, will provide these 7 factors, and the forest is going to grow. And if you look at the forest, the level of biomass that is in there is massive. But nobody goes to the forest with a bag of fertilizer. The forest takes care of itself. But the farm you have to manage, because while the forest is a closed system, the farm is an open system. Stuff gets out of the farm. When you take produce out of the farm and take it to the market, or you process, you are taking stuff out of the system, which have to be replaced. Hence, you see somebody's going with a product. It's fertilizer, it could be water, it can be a number of other things. So this is the difference between the two, and I need you to bear that in mind as I proceed with my presentation. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about soil. What is soil? There are several definitions, and one of the most scientific that would come from the Soil Science Society of America is that just give me a minute there, let me okay, the definition that the Soil Science Society of America would have is that soil is an unconsolidated mineral or organic matter on the surface of the earth that has been subjected to and shows the effects of several environmental factors like the climate, water, temperature, the work of microorganisms, the slope of the land, the type of parent material you have over time. It's a mixture of a number of interactions that eventually gives you a soil. That is a highly scientific definition of soil. Then you have one that is a lot simpler, and one that I would say is kind of more uh, close to what the average man would talk about. A soil is a living, dynamic layer on the surface of the earth, and it is made up of solid minerals, organic matter, water, and air. The soil acts as a medium for the growth, filter of plants' growth, filtering of water, and it houses billions and billions of microorganisms. That is a definition I'm sure that we are a lot more comfortable with, as the other one is a bit more scientific in its presentation. Just give me a minute there. Let me share this thing out. Where does soil originate from? Soil originates from the slow breakdown of rocks. And that is the key thing. The breakdown of rocks. Rocks is the parent material that makes up soil. And that goes through a process of weathering and the accumulation of decaying organic matter. Over hundreds and thousands of years, physical, chemical, and biological processes transform these raw materials, that is the rocks, into living, layered ecosystem that support plant and animal life. And this is what we really call a soil. So a soil really starts from rocks. Now there are three main rocks that you can think of. There's igneous rocks, sedimentary rocks, and metamorphic rocks. So the igneous rocks would be rocks that comes out of the volcano. So these volcanic islands like Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Grenada, Martinique, most of the soils as a result of igneous rocks. That is rocks that came out of volcanic reactions, and they went through a process of weathering that gave you a soil. Then you have sedimentary rocks, which is the fine material. It can be either igneous or metamorphic rocks that finally assemble somewhere and get deposited and give you a soil. A clear example of a sedimentary soils is Barbados. Barbados is limestone, and limestone is sedimentary material, calcium carbonate, okay? Now, metamorphic rock can be either igneous or sedimentary rocks that have been subjected to tremendous pressure and high temperatures, and they get transformed to a different kind of rock. So there are three different types of rocks on the earth out of which a soil is going to evolve. And given the fact that there are three different types of rocks, you expect to get different types of soils coming out of these rocks, okay? Now, the principle of these rocks is what they call the rock cycle. All these three rocks interact with each other over time, and that time is long. It's millions of years. And so the rock cycle is a slow, continuous earth process where the rocks constantly change from one type to another. So you move from igneous to sedimentary to metamorphic, back down to igneous, and it goes like that. And a lot of that is driven by the internal heat inside the core of the earth and the tectonic plates. You see the earth, the world is sitting on hot material that keep floating and moving. Every now and then they knock each other and we end up with earthquakes and things like that, right? So it's this continuous movement of material that transform the rocks from one type to the next over time. This is a graphical explanation of the rock cycle. If we begin with the magma is what's happening in the middle of the earth. That's where everything is hot there, everything is molten. It comes out as igneous rock via the volcano, volcanic reactions like we had in Montserrat in these other places. Then the material comes down, it gets weathered into sediments and forms sedimentary rocks. And that same material would continue being deposited and go into a situation where it is subjected to a lot of pressure. It goes into a metamorphic rock, and then it melts and gets back into the magma, and that cycle continues all the time. What is key for that is that you have a high temperature, you have pressure, You have weathering processes taking place. I'll talk a little bit about the weathering, which is a lot of chemical reactions that break down the rock from one stage to another. So when these rocks are subjected to these weathering processes, the end product is going to be a soil. So you start with rock, you're going to end up with a soil. So the soil is going to have varying ages. It depends on what stage you are, what rock, and where it is on the surface of the earth. So there are four factors that come together to give you a soil. The climate, that is the rainfall, the temperature, because the weathering of the rock is a chemical reaction. And some of you who may have some understanding of chemical reactions, it's something that's happening in water, it's in a medium, and stuff interact with each other to give you new products sometimes, or they change into other products, right? So you have climate, which is a key thing, temperature, moisture, and rainfall acting on those rocks. Then you have biotic factors acting on the rocks as well. Your plants, the plant roots, the microorganisms that are in the soil, even man himself acts on the rocks because we get involved in breaking rocks for one reason or the other, whether it's for construction, whether in farming. But all that is part of the mechanical stuff that the biotic factors are involved in. That is plant roots, microorganism, and man himself. Then the third one is topography, slopes. And we in the Caribbean, particularly in these islands, because of the volcanic origin and how the soil came about, is a lot of hills. And these hills add to the soil formation because material fall down the hills, water carry them down the hills, and all of that come together to give you a soil particle somewhere that would later on develop into a soil. The fourth one is your parent material, which is these three rocks that I mentioned earlier on. And there can be a fourth parent material, which is the plant material, that is when forests and these things get covered up, a kind of a rock evolves. But that rock is what we call what we mine as oil. The plant material gets under pressure and it gets decomposed and give you the oil that we mine in Venezuela and all of that. So that is a kind of a rock, but as far as agriculture and soil formation is concerned, I'm not discussing that, okay? So the three we're discussing are igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary rock. And the last one has to do with time. This thing takes a long time. The weathering process takes thousands and thousands of years for us to get maybe an inch or half an inch of soil. It may take over 1,000 to 2,000 years. It depends on where you are. In the tropics, it's a faster process. Up in the cold, where the temperatures are lower, the rates of reaction are slower, so it takes longer, right? But time is really a factor that we do nothing about, but you just wait. These processes happen, and in the end, you end up with a soil. Okay. This is kind of a schematic. You end up with a soil as a result of these four interactions happening. Here would be your plant and animals. These are your biotic factors. Your parent material, which is your igneous, sedimentary, metamorphic rocks, climate, topography, and time. And they all work together, and you end up with what we now have as a soil that we finally grow plants in. The forest is immersed in soil. Okay, these are the four types of rock: sedimentary, igneous, metamorphic rock. They weather over time. They break down through physical, chemical, and biological reaction that would then supply the mineral mixes that we have now that we call a soil. So you start with a rock, and over time, all these processes break down and give you this material that is very friable, that you can play with, you can grow crops in, okay? This is another illustration of how you move. On this side here, on the far left, this would have been your original rock. Then you have some lichen and little moss and what beginning the process. But the factors of soil formation that I mentioned, which is parent material, which is this here, time, climatic factors, all of these things are acting and you move into the right. So you see now it has broken up when we get here. It continues to break up and it continues to break up until you end up with layers, right? And this is really the end product of the process. That whole process is called pedogenesis, where you move from a rock to a soil. But the end product is usually a layers. So you have what in the soil science they describe as horizon. You have the A horizon, the B horizon, the C horizon, and way down at the bottom you have the original rocks, right? A lot of our farming and our business of discussion today is in the A and part of the B horizon. There's also a little layer up there that is not labeled, where you have organic matter sitting below the trees that you have on that side, okay? Let's continue. So as a result of the weathering process, you end up with something like that. This is a road cut. This is how deep the soil is. It is finer at the top. As you get down to the bottom, you see the remnants of the old rock. But the end product of the weathering of the factors of formation is the soil that we have, which is what we are going to discuss as to how we can keep that soil as healthy as possible. Now, in studying soil, there's something called a profile. That is a cross-section going vertically in the soil that shows you the layers. So you see a O horizon, that is organic matter. Organic matter is the remains of plant material. So these plants that are up there are decaying, they are breaking down, and they drop in material up there. Below, you have a A horizon, you have a B horizon, and a C horizon. The texture differ. So down here, you have more rocks. As you go up, it's a little finer. Up here is very friable. If you would notice in the diagram, the plant roots don't go below down into the sea, because plant roots are looking for food, they're looking for water, they're looking for nutrients. There are no nutrients down at the bottom there. The nutrients are going to be in the B and the A, and a lot of it in the O. So in studying soil health, our interest is these three layers. Now, when you end up with the soil, finally, the soil has components. There's a solid component, and there's a space. The solid component is made up of minerals. So these minerals come out of the various rocks, but the important minerals for us, and some of you may have heard of it, is sand, silt, and clay. These are where all the action takes place as far as plant growth is concerned. And you have a layer that has organic material. And that organic material is of two types. You have living organic material and you've got dead organic material. And on this side here, on the left side here, there's a void. That void is often filled with water. So if you have a flooded condition after heavy rain, that is completely filled with water. If you have a drought condition, there's no water. All you have is air. So over time, there's a fluctuation of air and water, air and water. Ideally, you would like it to be half air, half water. But that can change, and there are a number of things that would happen to a soil that will cause that to change. Later on, I will talk a little bit about something called compaction. Compaction is such that it could reach a stage where this area that has the pore space may disappear completely, and all you have is this solid material. You don't want that. For a healthy soil, you need to have water, you need to have air. Sorry. For a healthy soil, you need to have water, you need to have air, you need to have your organic material, as well as your mineral. So when a soil at times get unhealthy, it's because that pore space may have disappeared because we compact the soil, because of erosion. There are a number of things which I will touch on as we go forward. Okay. Now, there are some core soil processes that are necessary for the maintenance of soil health. Okay. So these processes are decomposition. A decomposition is taking place in the soil, and that decomposition is largely the decomposition of plant material. Plant material are broken down by bacteria and fungi, and that leads to the organic component that I talked about earlier on. When we went in this earlier slide here, we talk about the organic material. That is as a result of decomposition of plant material, and that ends up giving you that organic matter. The second core process that happens in a soil is what they call nutrient cycling. The nutrients that are in the soil, and we will talk about these nutrients later. There are about 17 important nutrients that are in the soil. They cycle. By cycling, it means that it gets into the soil, plants take it up, organisms take it up, it goes out of the soil and it comes back in. That cycle continues all the time. And where that happens most critically is in the forest. You remember that icebreaker. Nobody carries nutrients to the forest. All the nutrients in the forest are brought about as a result of cycling. So the plant decomposes, you have decomposition, the material falls down on the surface, bacteria, fungi act upon it, release the nutrients, and the plant take it up again. Okay? So you have decomposition, you have cycling. Then you have a third one, which is soil aggregation. So when all of this material are there, something brings them together. So the roots of the plant, the hyphae of the fungus, all of these things bind these particles together into clumps. Sometimes we call them aggregates, sometimes we call them PEDs, but it's important that it puts it into clumps to give you what we call the structure of the soil. I will talk about the structure of the soil a little later. So the structure is how these particles are arranged, and that arrangement is a result of the aggregation of the particles brought about by the fungus and these things, okay? The other process that is important is water infiltration and retention. Water has to pass through the soil because the soil is a living medium. Just like we need water, the plant roots need water, the bacteria in the soil need water, the fungi needs water, the earthworm, all of these needs water. So the soil finds a way to retain water. When I go back to this earlier diagram I showed you where there is the pore space, in there you have water, you have air. Ideally, we would like it to be half air, half water. But sometimes that can change depending on weather and whatnot. So water infiltration and retention is important. So infiltration, the water passes through and goes down to the water table, ends up in the river and then into the sea. Retention, some of it is kept back for a lot of these processes that we talk about, right? So your soil has water, but it's not too much water that it prevents the roots from breathing or the microbes from working, okay? Another core process is soil respiration. Things are living in the soil. Just like we respire, we eat carbohydrates, we break it down, and we exhale carbon dioxide, moisture. A lot of respiration takes place in the soil, and the microorganisms are a key factor. If they cannot respire, then they are not able to do the functions that they ought to. So it is important that these organisms respire, so they take oxygen, they release carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide then goes up into the atmosphere. So we have all these stories about greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide being an issue. A lot of the carbon dioxide that we have are in two places. It's in the ocean and it's in the soil, right? We try to keep as much of it there in the form of organic matter and whatnot. But it is important for the life of the soil to measure soil respiration. So if we are looking as to how healthy a soil is, what we do sometimes is measure the level of respiration in the soil. We measure how much carbon dioxide is given out, and we compare it with other soils to decide which one is more healthy than the other. And the other one is what we call bioturbation. It has to do with the bigger organisms like your earthworms, your ants, your millipedes, and these things, they churn the soil around. They continue mixing the soil. And that mixing is very good for you to have your aeration, but also it is important as it provides areas for your microorganisms to hide and live. If it's out in the open, that water can carry it away, it can be a problem. So these core processes are happening in the soil. So any healthy soil we have, all of these processes are taking place. When a soil becomes unhealthy, something is wrong. One of these processes are not happening as they ought to, and often that happens at the level of the farm, not in the forest. Okay, let's talk about the indicators. No, let me move on to understanding what is really soil health. So a definition for soil health is this: a healthy soil is a soil that can sustain plant growth, store and cycle nutrients, hold water effectively, support beneficial organisms, and resist erosion and degradation. I would want you to commit that to mind as we go through this lecture. You need to look at what I am presenting in the context of these 5 factors. A healthy soil, sustain plant growth, it stores and cycles nutrients, it holds water effectively, it supports beneficial organisms, and it resists erosion and degradation. Any of these factors that get compromised, it leads to an unhealthy soil. And we need to do the things that we can to reverse it, okay? Now, let's look at the components of soil health. There are 3 basic components. There's a physical component, there's a chemical component, and a biological component. Let's start with the physical. The physical is what you can touch, okay? Soil texture. So the soil that I spoke about that was finally going through all these processes and ended up as a soil, we showed you the section that is the solid section. You have sand, silt, clay, and organic matter. The physical part, we're going to focus a little bit on the sand, silt, and clay. So the proportion of sand, silt, and clay in a soil is really what is its texture. And that texture is going to differ because you have different amount of sand, silt, and clay. And that has an impact on the health of the soil. And we will talk about that a little later. We'll talk about the structure, how the particles are arranged. These things, how they are stuck together and arranged, that give you a structure. Water infiltration, how water passes through the soil and how it is drained, and how a soil can get compact. Remember I said earlier on, if you compact the soil, then that space that you have for air and water gets small, and then the soil does not function as it ought to. Okay? So I'll touch on each of these individually. Texture. Texture is the proportion of sand, silt, and clay in the ground, in the soil. It controls how the soil holds water, how air moves through the soil, and how it stores nutrients. Because that's what the soil does. It holds water, it stores nutrients, and then releases to the plant. Okay? Because this mix comes from natural parent material, your igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary rock, you cannot easily change it. So the texture of a soil remains all its life. You cannot go and change the texture, but you can change the structure. And we'll talk about that a little later, right? But it is, even though you cannot change it, it is important that you know the texture of your soil. Because if you know the texture of your soil, then you know how to manage your soil and what you need to do to keep your soil healthy. Now, sand. So sand is a very hard, large material, okay? The size is somewhere between 2 millimeters and 0.05 millimeters. That is sand. So any part of the soil that is between 2 millimeters and 0.5 millimeters inside falls in the category of sand. Anything above 2 millimeters, we're not considering it. So that's going to be rock, it's going to be pebbles and stone. But for the purposes of discussing soil and looking at the properties of soil, we confine ourselves to anything between 2 millimeters and 0.002 millimeters. Later on, you'll see where clay falls, okay? So sand, that is the size of sand. It is visible, you can see it. You walk on the beach, you pick up sand. It is round or angular in shape. Sand grains are usually quartz. Quartz is a substance called silica dioxide. And it looks white, and sometimes it have little colors, as you would see there, depending on where you get it, right? In a lot of the volcanic areas, they tend to be colored simply because of the kind of volcanic reaction. But generally, you would see sand as white. We always like white sand. Guyana has a lot of white sand. But generally, sand would be kind of cream to white in color. Size 2 millimeters, 2.05 millimeters in diameter. Okay, sand in soil will be brown or yellow or red because of iron or aluminum oxide that is coating it. So these colors that you see there in this diagram there, for instance, the red, it could be iron oxide coating the sand. Silt. Silt is smaller than sand. It is between 0.5 millimeters and 0.02 millimeters in size. It is not visible without a microscope. So while you can see a grain of sand, you can't see a grain of silt. You need to put it under a microscope. So this diagram you see here is from an electron microscope that they have a photo of a sand particle. Quartz is a mineral, is often the dominant mineral that is in silt. Since all the other minerals have weathered away, so that is what is going to be left there, right? Clay is the third fraction, and it is anything that is less than 0.02 millimeters in size. Now, while the sand and the silt may be rounded, the clay is flat. It's not rounded because clay is like little layers. It's almost like a little sandwich of material. Okay. It is flat plates like tiny flakes, you know, like cornflakes or anything like that. Flat like that. They are very small and colloidal. That is, if you suspend clay in water, it's not going to settle. So you mix water with soil, you see some stuff settle at the bottom, that is sand and silt, but you see the material above remaining yellow for days. That is clay. Clay will not settle. And again, you don't see clay with the naked eye. You would see it under a microscope. It has a large surface area. It's very small, but if you look at soil, clay together is a large surface area. The illustration there is a spoonful. It's almost the size of a football field as area. And that is important when it comes to how it holds nutrients and how it holds water. Okay? So when these particles mix together in varying proportion, you get what they call a textural class. So in the world of soil science, there are 12 textural class of soil. So you have a sand, a loamy sand, a sandy loam, a loam, a sandy clay loam, a sandy clay loam, all the way down to clay. As you move from the sand down to the clay, the particle sizes get smaller and smaller, and in between you have varying mixes, right? And that is important because if you know the texture of your soil, then you are in a position to act if your soil are getting unhealthy. Now, this is another illustration which the science people use to determine the textural class. So you're going to do an analysis that you measure how much sand, how much silt, how much clay that is in a particular sample of soil. I'm not going to go into the detail of how you do that, but you end up with a certain percentage silt, a certain percentage clay, and a certain percentage sand. You put it in that textural triangle, and you are now able to say what is the texture of your soil. So like here, the silt goes this way, the clay goes across here, and the sand goes this way. Where the 3 points converge based on the percentage of your sand, silt, and clay, then you end up with your textural class. Now, that is the high end of doing that analysis. There is a field method where you can take the sample of soil, roll it up into your hand, into a ball, make a ribbon with it, thread it through your hand, and as the thread goes through and it breaks, if you measure the length, you can now go into a table and be able to decide what is the proportion of sand, silt, and clay you have based on the length. So the soil that goes longer would have more clay than those that are shorter. Like sand is not going to go very far, silt maybe a little further, but the further you're going to go is because you have more clay in the sample. So if you are doing work to understand the health of your soil, it's a practical way to use that technique to be able to decide what class of soil that I have. And based on that class of soil, I would be able to know how to manage that soil to keep it healthy. Okay, so and out of that, I would show you quickly the various classes. So in your textural triangle, sandy soil, coarse textured, loamy sand is at the end there. It's on the bottom left. So you have sand, you have loamy sand, you have sandy loams. These are sandy soils. They are coarse textured. That coarse means that the particles are big. Then you have loamy soils. There you go a little further up, sandy loams. So you have some sand, less sand than the one before, but a little more clay and a little more silt. You continue on, you have coarse loamy soils. You talk about loams and silts. Now, loams are almost the middle of everything, where you have equal proportions of sand, silt, and clay, and little variation. Ideally, the best soils are going to be loam soils, okay? Both from the point of view of the ability to hold water, their texture, their structure, they are the best soils, and they normally have the better fertility, okay? You have another fine loam. Again, you go into closer to the clays. By saying fine, it means that you have more of clay than you would have of sand and silt, okay? You have sandy clay loams, you have clay loams, silty clay loams. Then you have the clay soils, which is way up there, where the percentage of clay is always very high, almost greater than 50% of clay, okay? All of these soils calls for different management and stuff of that nature, okay? Now, how does soil texture affect your soil health, okay? Soil texture, water storage. So your fine textured soils like your clay that I showed you earlier on hold a lot more water than the medium textured soil like the loams, and lot more water than the sun, okay? Nutrients. It holds a lot more nutrients in your clay and silt particles than you would have in your sand. So your soils that are clay soils tend to retain nutrients a little better. And I wouldn't go too deep into the nutrient holding, but clay soils have a negative charge. You know, your battery, a battery has a positive and negative. So they are negative. The nutrients that we will be talking about later on, most of them have a positive charge. So that negative on the clay holds that positive and prevent you from losing the nutrients. That is why your clay soil holds a lot more fertility than your sandy soils. Your organic matter in your soil also is very strong as far as holding nutrients are concerned, because organic matter has both a plus and a negative, while your clay only has a negative. Organic matter has a plus and a negative. Okay? The other effect of texture is that the biology and carbon, the finer soils can hold a lot more of the microbial population and organic matter. So as a result of that, they bind with clay and they protect your organic matter. Okay, so your clay soils tend to have a lot more organic matter than your sandy soil. Tillage and compaction. Coarse and medium soils resist compaction. So sand, you can walk on sand anytime it's wet, it doesn't compact. But if you now walk on clay, that is fine. The clay get compressed and compact to the point where, go back to the earlier diagram, that space that I said that is pore space gets so compressed that you have no water in the soil. And in situations where you have drought and things like that, it can be a problem. So how you manage your healthy soil, how you manage a soil health based on your textural group, okay? So for your sandy soil, you need to focus on adding organic matter to your soil. That sandy soil is not going to work well by itself. You need to add organic matter. And that organic matter can be compost, it can be cover crops, farmyard manure, organic matter. We'll talk a little about organic matter later. This will boost the ability of the soil to hold water and retain nutrients. That the sand does not have no charge, is inert. The silt has no charge, is inert. But your clay has charge and your organic matter has charge. So if you want to improve the ability of your soil to retain nutrients, you add organic matter. Fine clays, you focus on minimizing tillage because these soils are very easy to compact. You want to minimize, don't till them too much. So you avoid putting heavy machinery on them that will cause them to be compact. Your loamy soils, which is really perhaps some of the better soils, it is important that you maintain rotations of crops, put in crop residue, as these soils are more balanced than the other two soils, the clay soil and the sandy soil. So you find that there's better room for air, root movements, and everything is a lot better in there. So the challenge that you would have is with your sandy soil and your clay soils, as far as the texture is concerned, but you also need to pay attention to your loamy soils to ensure that you do the things that you keep them loose. You rotate crops on it. You continue to add organic matter to keep it alive. Okay? So that is texture. Let us move on to soil structure. Structure is just how the particles are arranged, right? While you cannot change your texture, but you can change your structure. So you can change how particles are arranged. So it's how the particle aggregates come together to form what is called PEDs, little balls of soil, okay? Now, it is not an inherent property of the soil, so you can change it. So you can mash up your structure if you're not careful, through over plowing, through not adding enough organic matter, you can mash up your structure. This is an example of what I mean by structure. Here, structure, your aggregate has particles of sand, silt, clay, and humus, okay? But these aggregates now join together, organic matter is joining them together to give you your structure. So in your good structure, you have space in here that roots and air and stuff can pass through, right? As against below, where you have the bad structure, you do not have that kind of space. So you do everything to try to develop structure. And one of the things that help you develop structure is you need to add organic matter. Add organic matter, you add manure. You couldn't add clay to the soil to try to develop structure, because if you do that, you almost end up with something like cement. The answer to good structure is add organic matter. And this is another illustration of the kind of structures you have. This one is single grain. It's like sand on the beach. Water passes through very rapidly. Okay. This one is blocky. So it's like blocks. And the blocky can be angular. It can be subangular around the edge. Then you have platy, is like layers. So in the blocky, the water passes through moderately. In the platy, it is very slow. The water passes very slow. Granular, this is the best structure you want, granular. So the earlier diagram of the structure that I have of particles coming together, that is granular. And that is the best structure that you could have. In there, you have good airspace, you have water passing through, good air, that's fine. Then you have prismatic and you have massive. These are a lot more difficult structures. They are difficult because water do not pass through them easily. When it comes to massive, that is heavy clays, water would hardly pass through. We have a lot of difficulty with that. What is the benefits of good structure as far as soil health is concerned? Water and air movement. Water is going to infiltrate very easily. Good granular structure lets rainwater soak in fast instead of running off. When it is running off, it tends to carry soil with it, and you have what they call erosion. Then you have retention. The tiny pores inside the beds and the clumps that we have there, it holds the moisture for the plant. So you see, when rain falls, gravity takes that water and takes it to the sea. Naturally, it's going down. The river is flowing towards the sea. But the soil holds some of that water for the plants. If you have good structure, more of it is being held. And aeration, the large space that you have there allow oxygen to reach the roots and the organisms that are in the soil so that they can proliferate. The other benefit of good structure is your root growth and the biology in the soil. So your roots can penetrate the soil a lot easier. It's a habitat for the homes for the earthworm, the bacteria, and the fungi. And there's a lot of nutrient cycling taking place. So the active microbes in the well-structured soil break down the organic matter efficiently. Plant roots take that organic matter, it goes up, the plant's leaves come back down again, and that continues all the time. That is the cycle that takes place in the forest. That is why the bag of fertilizer will always go to the farm. And it protects against damage. Good soil structure protects against damage. And the damage is erosion, where you lose your soil because of wind and water moving over the land. If you have good aggregates, these aggregates resist that movement of water and you do not lose your soil. And then the other factor of damage that you have is compaction. It helps you resist compaction, that is squeezing the soil together, whereby you lose your space for air and water, and you end up with a hard material that roots cannot penetrate, and you have a lot of difficulty in growing crops. Let's talk a little bit about water infiltration and drainage, right? This is very important. Water infiltration and drainage controls how water moves through your soil. Good infiltration and proper drainage maintain a balance of air and moisture. It preventing your roots from being suffocating. It reduces erosion. It supports the microorganisms. And it is necessary for plants to grow and to be structurally stable, because one of the things that the soil does is to support the plant. So if you have good root system going through the soil as a result of good infiltration and drainage, your plants are going to stand up and expose their leaves to the sunlight, right? You would see in instances where you have hurricanes, the forests many a times are able to stand up. You don't see as much devastation as you would see in your banana field or in your farm, right? It's simply because the roots are able to go deeper because there's good infiltration and drainage. And the effects of that, oxygen comes in, you got good nutrient retention, your roots are growing well, you have erosion control. Also, waterlogging. Waterlogging is one of the worst things that you want to happen. And if you have poor drainage and low infiltration, you end up with waterlogging. And what waterlogging does is that it chokes the roots. They can't get oxygen for them to breathe. The organisms don't get oxygen for them to breathe. And you have a condition that is anaerobic and not favorable for plant growth or microbes. Root diseases, a lot of diseases come up and start to provide rotting to your roots if you have waterlogging. Soils are more easier compacted when they are wet and waterlogged than when they are not. So for instance, if your soil is wet, we don't advise that you run equipment over them because that compresses them and you get compaction. And one of the things that you happen also when you have poor drainage is that you lose nutrients. An important nutrient is nitrogen. And if nitrogen does not have the right condition and you have waterlogged condition, all your fertilizer you add that is nitrate and ammonia, they now turn into nitrogen gas by a process called denitrification and it goes up in the air. So you would have lost the expensive fertilizer that you bought. Okay. Compaction. I spoke a little bit about compaction already. I will move on because compaction is just squeezing the soil in a way that it is just not favorable for roots to go. And one of the things that we do in measuring how compact your soil is to do a test called the bulk density, where we take a sample of soil, we look at the weight of the soil, we divide it by the volume, and it's going to give you a density. And normally, if your density is over 1.6, then your soil is too compact. You need to do something to loosen it. And the things that you would do, sometimes you plow, but other times try adding organic matter. Okay, that's compaction. I've spoken about compaction. This is how you prevent compaction. You add organic matter. You grow cover crops. And cover crops are crops that you grow in between your main crop. And the whole idea is that the roots will go down and break up any compaction that you have and keep the soil open. And the important crops that you can grow in between your crops is vetiver grass, pigeon peas, lemongrass, bananas, and some agroforestry species. The key thing is that the roots of these things go down very deep, so they break any compact conditions that you have. Okay, let us look at the components of soil health. Okay, now that I've spoken about these factors around, what are the things that lead to a healthy soil? Okay, again, we have the factors that you have chemical, you have physical, and you have biological factors. Okay, let's look at the chemical factors. The chemical factors, you need to look at the nutrient levels in the soil. You need to look at the soil pH, you need to look at salinity, and you need to look at your organic matter content of your soil. These are the important chemical properties that you look at the soil when we talk about soil health. Okay, let's look at the nutrient level. The soil nutrient levels dictate how well a living ecosystem functions. You must have nutrients in the soil. That's why the forests have nutrients. If your farm is losing nutrients, then you are heading towards an unhealthy soil. Balanced micronutrients, that is your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and potassium, feed the life and fuel the microorganisms that cycle your organic matter. When nutrients are properly balanced, now, and that is the key word, balance. Because a little later on, I would show you the nutrients that are required for plant growth. But the key thing about them is that you must have them balanced. It's not a lot of nitrogen and no phosphorus and very little potassium. They must be balanced, okay? These are the essential nutrients. A plant, for it to grow well, your crop, you require somewhere between 17 and 18 elements or essential nutrients. The word essential is there because it means that if any one of these things are missing, the plant is going to be compromised. Its yield is going to be compromise. You're not going to get the yield that you want. You begin to see disease conditions and things like that. Okay? Of the 17, 3 of them we do not have to add. Mother Nature gives us that in the air and the water. So your carbon, your hydrogen, and your oxygen. The rest, the other 14, is supplied either from the soil or as a fertilizer source, right? So in our earlier icebreaker, the forest does not require anybody to go there, but the farm requires fertilizer as a source of the nutrient. So the forest supplies all of these 14 nutrients, and they are broken up into 3 main groups: macronutrients, and it is macro because you need them in the largest amounts. That doesn't mean that they are more important than the others, but the plant uses more of it than the others. So that is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, NPK. Then you have secondary that you require not as much as the macro, but a lot more than the micro. That is sulfur, calcium, and magnesium. And then you come to the micronutrients, which you require in very small amounts relative to the other 2, is zinc, copper, iron, manganese, boron, chlorine, molybdenum, cobalt, and sometimes silica. Silica is sometimes important for disease resistance and things like that. But there's enough silica in the soil that you don't have to add, because the sand in the soil does provide a lot of silica. So these 17 essential nutrients, for you to have a healthy soil, they must be present in quantities that the plant requires for it to grow. Now, I want to talk a little bit about pH, because pH is a very important aspect of your soil. I remember as a student, you would be told that if there's only one test you can do a pH test. And what is pH? pH measures the acidity and alkalinity in a soil. Okay, so a healthy soil must have a healthy pH. Okay, so you have in this pH, within a range of 0 to 14, anything between 0 and 6.99 heading to 7 is considered acidic. 7 is neutral. Between 7 and 14 is alkaline. Okay. Now, the term pH says potential hydrogen. So you are actually measuring the concentration of the hydrogen in the soil solution. And the higher the concentration of the hydrogen is, the lower the pH, the more acid the soil is, right? So you try your best not to allow your soil to get too acidic, because if it gets acidic, there are a number of other things that are happening. Also, if it gets too alkaline, there are a number of issues as well. So pH directly controls the overall soil health by dictating whether the plant roots can absorb vital nutrients, how well beneficial microbes can function, and how stable the physical, structural of the soil remains. pH does control that. That is why pH is a very important measurement. So in monitoring soil health, you have to measure the pH of your soil rather regularly. Okay. The effects of the pH: neutral pH between 6 to 7 is the essential micronutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and whatnot are highly accessible. That is the best zone in which you would want your soil, your crops to be. Your vegetables work better in that zone. Then you have the acidic area that is below 5.5. Phosphorus doesn't work well below there because it gets tied with iron and aluminum. And the elements like aluminum and manganese begin to get toxic. So you don't want your soil going to a pH below 5.5. Anytime you are below 5.5, you are in a totally unhealthy and unproductive soil. Alkaline soils also have issues, and the issues with the alkaline soil is the micronutrients, the copper, the zinc, the iron, tend to become insoluble when your pH is high. So you want your pH to be somewhere between 6 and 7. Here you have a healthy soil. This is an illustration of the availability of nutrients. You see at the top to the left, it is strongly acidic. Now the thickness of the bars shows the availability of the nutrients. You notice at the far left, the bar is very thin. It means to say that it's highly unavailable. As you move closer to the center and you get to slightly acidic and slightly alkaline, the bars for all of them are fairly large, which means to say that the availability of the nutrients are better. Okay. Once you begin to go higher than that, then you notice where the micronutrients are, your iron, your manganese, your boron, your copper. It tends to get a little thinner. The only micronutrient that tends to do well at high pH is molybdenum, and that is important for your legumes, where you grow peas and beans and whatnot. Molybdenum is a very important element for nitrogen fixation. At high pH, it works well. The pH effect on microbial activity. So if you have thriving bacteria, these things work well when you have a pH between 6 and 6.5. And bacteria, as I mentioned earlier on, is a very important element of the nutrient cycling. Okay. So you have organic material in the ground. The first set of things that work on them is your fungi. It breaks it down into smaller material, and then your bacteria begin to act to release the nutrients. So we have something like nitrogen fixation. When you add your nitrogen to the soil, the plant can only take the nitrogen in the form of nitrate. But when you add your fertilizer, whether it's ammonium nitrate, whether it's organic matter or whatever, that nitrogen is tied in. You need to release that nitrogen for it to be taken up by the plant. And what does that is the bacteria. So you have two bacteria, Nitrosomonas and Nitrobacter. They are involved in nitrogen fixation. So they release the nitrogen so that the plants can really take them up. So you apply your fertilizer, whether it's ammonium sulfate, the plant cannot take the ammonia. So they have to break the ammonia to nitrate and then to nitrite and then to nitrate. So Nitrosomonas take it from ammonia to nitrite, then Nitrobacter takes it from nitrite to nitrate, which the plant can take. Then you have Azotobacter, which is a free-living bacteria that is in the soil. It's not attached to anything. It is just fixing nitrogen. When it dies, the nitrogen goes on to the soil and is taken up by the plant. You have another bacteria, Rhizobium, that is in your root nodule. So your peas and beans that fix nitrogen, that's the bacteria that does that. But it requires a good pH. So if your pH is not right, somewhere between 6 and 7.5, you find that you are very inefficient as far as nitrogen utilization is concerned. So we can constitute that your soil is not healthy. When the pH of the soil is not right, when it is too acidic or too alkaline, the breakdown of organic matter is very slow, right? Because the microbes that are doing that breaking down do not like the pH that is subjected to. Soil structure. Remember, we spoke about soil structure, how the particles are arranged, right? When you have a balanced pH, your structure is a lot more stable because all the microbes that are putting things together and gluing and giving you the aeration and whatnot is at work. So therefore your aggregates are stable. But if now you have extreme acidity and sometimes extreme alkalinity, you can have a problem with compaction. Because as I mentioned earlier on, clay is in layers, and the layer of clay has aluminum, silica, and some other stuff in it. Once the pH is too low, that breaks down, and the aluminum comes out, the silica comes out, and the clay structure breaks down. So the clay is no longer well structured. It's now a mud that no water can pass through, right? So pH does affect your cell structure. And when you have poor structure, you have an unhealthy soil. The other factor that affects your soil health is salinity. And salinity is really, it has to do with salt. Salt, and more important, the element sodium. Because you notice in the elements that I have the same thing, sodium does not feature. Though plants use little amounts of sodium, and some plants can substitute sodium for potassium in their nutrition, like the coconut plants that are all by the beach. You ask yourself how they survive. They sometimes substitute their sodium. When they don't get potassium, they can substitute their sodium. But generally, you don't like sodium because sodium is bad for the soil. Okay? It disrupts the movement of water. It starves. Think of sodium like you see you have snail and you put in some salt on the snail. What it does, a reverse of osmosis, it pulls the water out of the snail and the snail gets shriveled and it dies. That is what salt does to the roots of your plant and whatnot. So you don't want salt in your soil. So you always need to check for salinity of your soil, okay? So high salt in your soil, you get lower crop yield. Hence the reason close to the beach is only tolerant plants you see that are surviving there. Generally, the usual trees that we see further away would not survive there because the salt is going to cause the soil to be infertile, causing water to be withdrawn from the roots instead of going into the roots. Okay, these are some of the aspects of salinity. It gives you water stress. It also breaks the structure of your soil, and it blocks nutrients from being taken up by the plant. There are also some biological effects of salinity. It really kills the bacteria because the bacteria, or rather a situation where you don't have soil pulling water out of its body. So anytime you have a soil that is saline, all the factors that I spoke about in terms of breaking down of organic matter and whatnot, that is not going to happen. And it's going to be critical that you either have to move somewhere else or find some way to deal with the salinity. In some cases, you just have to wash the salt out of the soil. So you just irrigate and irrigate with clean water until you wash away the salt. Sometimes you can add gypsum, which will, the calcium in the gypsum is going to take off the sodium. So there are ways and means that you can address the salinity, but then it can be a problem, especially in coastal areas. So your soil health is affected by salinity. Well, organic matter is really the heart of soil health. If you don't have organic matter, then you do not have a healthy soil. It acts as a sponge that holds water, nutrients. It feeds the bugs in the soil, the worms. It provides the glues that stick your material together to give you a good structure. And it makes the soil loose so that, your roots can go through, and that when the rain falls, the water don't run off, it soaks into the soil. So you have more percolation and infiltration than you have runoff, because runoff is what really gives you erosion. Okay, well, that's how it improves structure, by putting the glues to stick the things together, give you good space, it stops erosion. That's organic matter. It boosts the food web. It provides food for the microbes, because the food for the microbes is always organic matter. That is all they eat, organic matter. So the more organic matter you add to your soil, the healthier your soil is going to be, both in terms of the nutrients that it holds, but also the feeding of the microbes and the other organisms that release nutrients for plant uptake. Organic matter also helps to balance your pH. So you have acidic condition. The continuous addition of organic matter help raise the pH from the acid condition you have to a better condition. There are other ways of raising pH. That is, you need to add lime. But in this situation, organic matter is really the key thing. Okay, it improves structure. So, sorry, I'm going in the wrong direction. The second component of soil health is your biological properties. And in there is your earthworms, your microorganisms, your soil biodiversity, and soil organic matter decomposition. Earlier on, I spoke of soil organic matter as just a component, but the decomposition of organic matter, that process is an important soil health consideration, okay? So I will go briefly through each of them. Earthworms. Earthworms boost soil health by acting as a natural biological engineer. By an engineer, I mean it's in there changing things around, building, breaking down, and things of that nature. It improves soil structure, it increases water capture, and the recycling of nutrients. Just by burrowing through the soil and creating the holes and the tunnels that it does, it allows water to travel into the soil. You have better aeration, and it really supports good plant growth and crop yield. So earthworms is a very important component of soil health. And one of the things that you would look for as an indicator of how healthy your soil is look for earthworms. One of the soil health indicators, one of the tests that we do is try to see how much earthworms that there are in the soil. Take a sample of soil and you count the earthworms to compare soils in terms of their healthiness and their fertility. Earthworms also, because of the cast that they leave behind, they enrich nutrients. So the cast is packed with all the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium you need. In the digestive tract of the earthworm, it helps produce microbes that would help speed up the breakdown of your organic matter. And as far as the nutrient availability is concerned, the nutrients in the earthworm cast is a lot more available than even the nutrients that are in the pure organic matter, simply because of the composition of these nutrients. So it is a lot easier for the roots to absorb these nutrients coming from the worm cast. Well, it improves structure and water retention, again, because of the tunnel. So you have less compaction. The more the earthworm moves through the soil, the more it creates tunnel, and the less compact the soil is, the easier for water to flow. So this is the massive value of earthworms. Microorganisms. So you have a lower level. While I can see earthworms and hold them, these microorganisms, I need to look at them under the microscope. Okay. So microorganisms are the foundation of soil health, making it the living engine that fuels the plant growth and protects that soil ecosystem. The raw organic matter, it turns raw organic matter into usable plant food. It creates stable soil structure and fight off dangerous pests. Again, you notice all this discussion always comes back to organic matter, organic matter. The organisms that we consider as microorganisms are bacteria. They are the most common in the soil. So you have more bacteria in the soil than you have any of the others, be it fungi, protozoa, or nematodes. So the most that you have is bacteria. That's the most common. They break down easy to digest organic matter and lock nutrients into the root zone. Fungi. These are long thread-like organisms. They decompose the tough material, the wood, the lignin, and anything that is tough. And they pass on the end product to the bacteria, which then continues the breakdown process. So in your soil, you must have a balance of fungi and bacteria. And the last group is what they call protozoa and nematodes. These are bigger, you can see them, but many a times you have to look at them under the microscope, particularly your nematodes. Yeah, both nematodes and protozoa, you see them under the microscope. They are hunters that go and eat fungi, they eat bacteria. And they're important because after they eat and they excrete nutrients into the soil, but they also act as what I call bioagents. So some of the pests and diseases that are in the soil, they too feed on them and help control. So in your forest, there is enough protozoa and nematodes that take care of disease, that unless it's a really major outbreak, you don't go in the forest and see the plants under any disease condition, because in the soil, there is balance. So the key benefits that you get in terms of soil health is nutrient cycling. It feeds plants, it fixes nitrogen, it builds soil structure. Your microorganisms are very cool at that because of the glues and the threads that the fungi produce that binds the stuff together and give you good structure. And it provides a lot of air and water space so that you have good crumb structure for your roots to penetrate, for air to pass, and for water to percolate. It also provides defense against diseases. And I mentioned earlier on, some of them are feeders that feed on disease, bacteria, other fungi, and higher level stuff to give you control. And what has happened at the farm level, we have lost that control, hence the reason we resort to pesticides. And the pesticides make it worse because whatever little microbes that are left to do control, these pesticides tend to kill them. So using pesticides as far as these microorganisms are concerned is something that needs to be given careful consideration when we're talking about soil health. Now, there's soil biodiversity, and soil biodiversity really speaks as to the range of stuff you have in the soil, both starting from bacteria, going all the way to earthworms. They all live together in that complex that they call it a web, a food web. And they all interact with each other, depend on each other, and they keep the soil alive and fertile. If we lose that biodiversity, then our soil generally gets unhealthy. We need to encourage that biodiversity. And a lot of that encouragement of the biodiversity is some of the things that I said above that you need to do. Adding organic matter, ensuring that you don't have compaction, you have good structure. All of that create the environment for good soil biodiversity. Some of that biodiversity helps in soil health. It multiplies and makes the soil health factor a lot more pronounced because it gives redundancy and resilience. It's an insurance policy that you take. So if one species struggles in the drought condition, then in the rainy condition, you have one that will replace it. Or even in the dry condition, one species may be struggling for one reason or the other. There's always another one to step in and keep the processes going. So biodiversity is really the heart of it. It's also a climate shield. As the soil try to recover from extreme conditions, whether it is dry spell or flooding, the soil biodiversity help the soil recover because of the things that it does, the conversion of organic matter, the improvement in soil structure, the improvement in drainage. All of these redundancies help improve the soil as far as the recovery from stress. And one of the issues of soil health we talk about is resilience, how we are able to get the soil to withstand the challenges that come, whether it's drought or whatever. Climate change presents us with two extreme situations. Drought condition, excess rainfall. We don't know when it's coming. We don't know the extent at which to come. We need to build resilience in the soil that when it comes, you can deal with that. Okay, nutrient cycle is also another aspect. Nothing is wasted in that biodiversity. The end product of one feeds the other. It's a closed system. Pest control, as I mentioned earlier on, that they would defend each other and they would use certain unfavorable organisms as source of food. So diseases and pests that are problematic to the ecosystem is always dealt with as part of their food chain. So what would happen when your biodiversity drops? For sure, your soil is dead. The soil loses structure. It turns into a hard crust, and it is easily eroded. Chemical dependency. Farmers must use more synthetic fertilizers and other stuff to return nutrients in the soil, right? Because once you have lost that biodiversity, that recycling of nutrients is not there. Hence the reason that the bag of fertilizer will go to the farm and not the forest. And disease outbreaks is always a problem when you break that down. So you'll always see diseases at the farm level because we have broken that biodiversity structure, but at the level of the forest, it's not there. Yes, I'm just going to go through the slides quickly. Okay, we've done that. Okay, let's look at organic matter decomposition. Earlier on, I spoke about organic matter just as bulk organic matter, what it does. But just the decomposition of organic matter is a very important process. Soil organic matter decomposes directly in a way that it drives soil health by unlocking the vital nutrients and building the physical framework that will keep the soil alive. Yeah, because all the food that we talk about, be it for the microbes or the plant, comes from the decomposition of the organic matter. Without decomposition, dead plants would simply pile up. It would just be there, it would not decompose, and that is a problem. And the natural cycle of life in the soil will grind to a halt. So decomposition must be an ongoing activity if your soil is going to be healthy. If the decomposition is not happening, then you have a problem and your soil is unhealthy. And it's not happening whether because your pH is not right, your soil is too compact. There's a whole myriad of things that I mentioned earlier on above. So the decomposition process is a very important process as far as soil health is concerned. What does organic matter decomposition does? It unlocks the nutrients in the plant. It's a natural fertilizer. It's a continuous feeding. That process never stops. It is steady, it is slow, and it releases nutrients all the time for the plants to absorb. If you talk about a slow release fertilizer, that is it. It creates humus and builds structure. So that sticky leftover that you have is what it leaves behind, which is a dark substance. Humus is the dark substance. So when we look at the soil profile and we look at the upper part is dark, that darkness is as a result of that end product of organic matter breakdown, humus. Humus is the end. You don't go beyond humus. So when you reach humus, that is the end product of the decomposition, and that is where the product is the most useful because it supplies nutrients, it holds nutrients, it does a whole range of things, right? It makes the soil crumbly, gives you good structure, and there's a lot of root room because the texture it creates is a very good texture so that roots can penetrate and things like that. Water retention. Again, I referred to that earlier on. It's a bit of a repetition there. The organic matter acts as a sponge. It holds, the humus can hold that organic matter. Up to 90% of the weight of humus is water. Okay, so if you want to protect drought, you need to get organic matter into your soil. Right, so in sandy soil, in whatever, particularly in sandy soil, one of the answers to allowing you to have more moisture for plant uptake and nutrient uptake and whatnot is to add organic matter. So your humus gives you that kind of protection. Well, and it's also the fuel for the food web. I spoke about that earlier on. Everybody in that food web depends on organic matter for the source of carbon that it provides for them. Okay, so having gone through all of these basic aspects of soil health, the chemistry, the biology, and what before it, when we work on a farm, we want to understand how healthy our soil is. We don't dabble in all of these nitty gritty, but we want to look at the soil and see how healthy it is. And a simple field indicator that anybody could use, one, the color of the soil. So the darker the soil, it tells you the more organic matter that you have. You take up some of the soil and you play with it. If it's crumbly and it is not sticky or it's not sandy and running through your hand, that is the kind of structure you want, because there's good space for air, water, and also the texture of that material there would be enough clay and organic matter to retain your nutrients. So you look at structure, the presence of earthworms, always a key, because that is one of those that you don't need microscope to look at. You can dig up and maybe throw in some mustard thing in water that excites them and they come out. Earthworms, look for good drainage, look for strong root growth. Always pull up a tree and see what roots are below. You can pull up a weed, but the more extensive the root and the more it's going down, the chances are the healthier your soil. If the roots are going sideways, it means that something is preventing it from going down, and that can be compaction, it can be acidity, it can be a whole range of things. So you pull up a plant, look at the roots. If the roots are strong, it is white. If you now see it's red and you cut the cross section of the roots and you see red lesions, then we say we have nematodes and stuff like that. It means that your soil have a health issue. Okay, and a quick thing you do an earthy smell. You just take some of the soil and smell it. There is a nice earthy smell because of there's a set of organisms in the soil called actinomyces. They are now in a healthy soil. They're very abundant, and they give out a particular kind of smell that tells you have a healthy soil. Okay? But I will go deeper into more of the scientific lab-related indicators of soil health. Biological indicators. So you measure how much organic matter is in the soil. Normally soils would have organic matter. In this part of the world, because of the heat and whatnot, you do not find organic matter in natural soils higher than 5%. But there are soils where constant use of compost and stuff like that brings the organic matter up. Try to measure or see how much organic matter you have. And there are various tests that you would do in the lab to determine the organic matter. You also measure the microbial biomass, how much microbes that are in the soil. There are techniques for doing that. Soil respiration, you measure how much carbon dioxide is released by the soil organism, showing the metabolic activity. So the more carbon dioxide that are coming out is the more metabolically active the microbes are. And hence, we can conclude the healthier the soil, because what we want is activity of microbes in the soil as an indicator of health. And the only way we can measure that is by what they give out, what they respire, carbon dioxide. There are chemical indicators. So the indicator I did earlier on was biological. Now there are chemical indicators. pH, always measure the pH. It measures the acidity or alkalinity. It determines which nutrients are chemically available to the plants to absorb. So if you know that your soil is too acid, then you know you need to do some correction. And you correct your acidity by adding lime, or you add organic matter. If it is too alkaline, then you may have to add sulfur. I think I'll talk a little bit about that later. measure the nutrient levels in the soil. It's important that we know what these 14 elements that we spoke about. There's 17, 3 we get from Mother Nature. The other 14 resides in the soil and the plant takes it through the roots. Though there are new technologies that apply nutrients through the leaves, to the applied foliar. But the plant is so structured that the roots is the main place where root nutrients are taken. But with modern agriculture and technologies, they have studied certain elements, particularly the trace elements, that when there are deficiencies, because the deficiencies reach at a stage where you cannot wait to put it in the soil, you spray, right? But look at the nutrient levels in the soil. Do electrical conductivity to tell you about how much salt is in your soil. Is it saline? If it is saline, what do you do? Because salinity is really going to diminish your ability to grow crops. And the last one, the physical indicators, your bulk density. That is how compact your soil is. Aggregate stability, that is the structure, that you dig a clump of soil and from chest level, you drop it down. If it shatters and you see the things go all over, then you have a good structure. You drop it and it just drops like a dead rock and it does not move, then it shows you that the soil is too heavy, it is compact. So there are some things that need to be done. Aggregate stability also is done in the lab where you would put the soil in water for a period of time and see whether it is disintegrating or breaking, okay? Infiltration rates, how quickly water is going to pass through the soil. You would maybe take a cylinder, you put it down, you pour water in it, and measure how quickly it's going to take for the water to go down and disappear. If it is slow, then you have issues of compaction, you have issues of heavy clays. All of that are indicators that your soil may not be as healthy as you would like. Okay. Now, I want to go into a few techniques as to how to maintain a healthy soil. That is the practical side of it that I want to touch a little bit on. Okay. The first one is maintain adequate organic matter. Again, organic matter comes up again. That's the foundation of a healthy soil. It improves nutrient availability, water holding capacity, aggregation, and microbial activity, right? And one of the techniques that you can use is applied compost, decomposed compost or farmyard manure, return crop residues to the soil rather than burning or removing them. All residues should go back to the soil in one form. Either you put it directly or you compost it and you return it back. Use green manures and cover crops. Green manures and cover crops have a role to play in that when you're not growing a particular crop, you don't want to leave the soil bare. It is good to plant a crop that you're not going to grow it for money, but at a certain point, you either cut it back and plow it back into the soil because that crop would have pulled up enough nutrients, gathered carbon and whatnot, and you can put that back into the soil that would help improve the soil in terms of organic matter incorporation. Incorporate suitable organic matter materials such as composted plant residues. And these plant residues are all plant residues, including weeds. So if you're doing weed control using your weed whacker, the plant material that you've collected, compost that and take it back to the field after it has been composted. And you see, in plant health and healthy soils, the use of herbicide is discouraged, and we understand why, because of the impact on the microbial life. So if you can find ways and means of removing your weeds without using herbicides, it may be costly, it may not be practical, and the average farmer tends quickly to go to the to his spray can. But if you are using the weed whacker, that biomass, you can compost it and bring it back as a fertilizer. You apply biochar. Biochar is almost like charcoal. It's when you would take wood material and you burn it on the reduced oxygen. There's not much oxygen there. It's a process called pyrolysis. You end up with something like charcoal, and that charcoal holds nutrients. It absorbs water. It does a number of things to improve the texture, to improve the structure of your soil and give the soil a better capacity to hold nutrients as well as water. Because in the holes in between that burnt charcoal, elements go there and rest and stay there. Over time, they come back out again as the water levels change. So that also is an important way you can use to improve the organic matter levels in your soil. Often you use the biochar together with organic matter. Okay? Keep your soil covered. The technique, keep your soil covered. Bare soil is highly vulnerable to erosion, drying, and loss of organic matter. A good target is try to keep your soil cover as year round. Hence the reason that if you remove a crop, you try to put a what they call a follower crop, or a crop that you just put there just to keep the soil covered. You're not necessarily going to use it for economic reasons. Now, that is not a practice we do in the Caribbean. If anything at all, we leave it as a weed fallow. Weeds are what take over. But when we come to plant the next time, we don't use the weed and the material that it has accumulated. We burn the weeds or we cut it and throw it away, right? But in other more developed agricultures, they break that cycle with what they call a cover crop. And the cover crop can be a legume or anything that in the meantime will keep the soil covered, also put in some nutrients and go back into the cycle the next time you plant. So you can use mulches like grass, leaves or crop residue, cover crops, living ground covers. I mean, grass is one of them. Crop residues. So the crop residue that you would have after you harvested your crop, chop it up and put it back over the soil, spread it, and it will break down to provide organic matter later. Minimize soil disturbance. It can be difficult for us in the tropics, given, well, in some of our Caribbean soils, because of how heavy the soil is. But if you begin to practice organic matter additions over time, you would change the constitution of your soil to the point where you don't even have to plow or thing your soil. Your soil structure would have changed to the point where you just dig an area, plant your crop, and that continues as you continue to put organic matter in the soil. The reason why they say to minimize disturbance, anytime you disturb the soil, you introduce oxygen into the soil. That's all the microbes are waiting for. So all organic matter that they can get, they begin to oxidize it, send it as carbon dioxide in the air, and the kind of benefits that you would have required from the organic matter being there, you would have lost it. So the practice is not to disturb the soil. By not disturbing it, you are not introducing air and oxygen and agitating organisms to convert organic matter to carbon dioxide, okay? So you consider reduced tillage, minimum tillage, strip tillage. So you only till in specific areas. You don't plow the entire field. Avoid unnecessary cultivation, particularly when your soil is wet, because that disturbance in the end is going to lead to compaction. Control soil erosion, especially in the countries where we have very hilly terrain. Important for us to control erosion, because erosion means that you are losing fertility, you are losing soil, you're losing organic matter. And there are some other techniques that some of it is being used here. Contour planting, you plant along the contour, such that if there's any movement of water, it is intercepted along the contour, and you can then direct that water safely into a grass waterway or something without it gaining velocity and going down and causing erosion. You put contour grass strips. So in between your crops, you put grass strips. You put terracing where appropriate. Terracing is a bit expensive and it can be problematic, and it's difficult sometimes to get equipment up on slopes to do terracing. And we have had some very disastrous experiences with terracing. So while in theory it can work well, but it's not something that is easy to implement. contour buns. So you put buns along the contour, which is like little ridges that would intercept any water that is traveling down. So that water would then percolate downwards instead of flow. You do mulching, you put in mulch, whether it's live mulch, whether it's compost, plant residue, anything to cover the surface to prevent the impact of raindrops and the movement of water would help. Maintain vegetation in vulnerable areas. By vulnerable areas, I mean if you have gullies and you have areas that water is moving with high velocity, try to put vegetation there. Because you would have grass waterways, and what grass is very a good vegetation to help control there. Establish drainage structures like contour drains and and anything that is going to help direct water off the slope. And use agroforestry and permanent vegetation on steep slopes. There's some slopes you just should not cultivate. Just put trees there. That is going to help their stability. The fifth one is to maintain good soil structure. And in that maintaining good soil structure, we come again to the story of adding organic matter. Avoid excessive tillage, because as you till, you break the structure. Avoid compaction. Rotate your crops, okay? By rotating the crops, I mean that crops have different root systems. They are shallow crops, like your vegetables, your cabbage, your lettuce, shallow. But they are crops that go deep. So your tomato and these go deeper. Your pigeon pea go deeper. So try to have different types of crops that correspond to different depths of soil that they forage. That is going to help you to maintain your structure. Maintain biological activity. Keep your soil active all the time. And the key way of doing that is add organic matter. Avoid traffic over wet soils. Manage fertility based on soil testing. This is not something we do very much in the Caribbean. Soil testing. We tend to ignore soil testing. In the more developed agricultural system, testing is something that is done regularly. Because testing tells you of the nutrients that are in the soil, where they are in terms of their relative quantities, because you want balanced nutrition. You need to test to know what is there, because there are two tests that you can do. You do a soil test or a tissue test. So the soil test tells you what is in the soil. The tissue test tells you what is the plant feeling, because things can be in the soil, but the plant may not be feeling it. For instance, if your roots are inundated with nematodes, the plants are not feeling the nutrients because the nematodes are preventing the roots from functioning. So we need to test so that we have empirical evidence of what is the issues about our soil, right? And some of the things that we test for: standard pH, organic matter, CEC. I never spoke of CEC. CEC is what they call the cation exchange capacity. Cations are things that have positive charge. So your calcium, your magnesium, your zinc, they all have positive charge. So they stick on a negative charge, which is your clay and some organic matter. So that ability to hold cation and release cation is called cation exchange. So the higher your cation exchange, the greater the ability of your soil to store nutrients. So you need to know your CEC. So a sandy soil have a low CEC, sometimes 2 to 3. But when you have a clay soil and a heavy clay soil, you up to 14, 15, 20. You want a higher CEC so that when you add fertilizer or whatever nutrients, there's something there to hold it. Then you look at the basic nutrients, your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium. Often in this part of the world, they don't do many tests for nitrogen because nitrogen is always deficient in the soil, simply because of what nitrogen goes through. Nitrogen is not stable. All the others are fairly stable, but nitrogen changes. So I'll do a nitrogen test today. I come back tomorrow, it would have changed because microbes are working on it and new organic matter is coming in, a lot of changes. But there are some labs who do nitrogen because sometimes you want to look at something called the CN ratio, the ratio between nitrogen and carbon. because that tells you how easy organic matter can decompose, okay? Phosphorus, potassium, calcium and magnesium, sulfur, and the important micronutrients, and the electrical conductivity. Always test your soil. Often your soil test is good for 4 years, 4 to 5 years. So if you do it once, you can use that data to make decisions about fertilizer use and whatnot for the next 4 to 5 years before you have cause to do another test. Okay. Maintain your appropriate pH. And I said that before. So even if you are not doing your regular soil tests, if you can do your pH tests, that's fine. There are little kits you can get that can give you an idea of pH, because pH is such an important component that it affects so many nutrients and whatnot. You need to get it right, okay? So where you have excessively acid soils, that is, you have a pH that is below 5.5 or somewhere between, often below 5.5, because most of the crops we have here can tolerate 5 point, down to 5.5. The crop that can go below 5.5 is something like pineapples. Bananas do well at 5.5. Most of your vegetables are somewhere between 6, 6.5, 7.5. But once you get below 5.5, you need to correct that. You have to apply agricultural lime based on the soil test recommendation. So when they would look at your exchangeable acidity, they do a calculation that will tell you how many pounds of lime to add to your acre to take your pH from whatever it is, 5.5 to 6.5 or wherever you want to add it. Your lime can be of two sources. It can be calcitic lime that has only calcium, or you can have dolomitic lime that has calcium and magnesium. So when you would have done your soil test and you get a pH that requires liming, you look at your magnesium. If your magnesium is low, then in your liming, you put your dolomitic lime. If your magnesium is high enough, don't put more magnesium, because magnesium tend to fight with potassium, and it makes your soil, it makes the soil kind of compact. It causes the soil to be squeezy. You don't want too much magnesium in your soil, okay? There's also an extreme position, another extreme position, which countries like Barbados and maybe parts of Antigua would experience, alkaline soils, where you have a pH above 8, 9 or thereabouts. You need to add agricultural sulfur, because the sulfur now is going to oxidize and give you sulfuric acid and bring down the pH. There's something called alum, is aluminum sulfate. It can help bring down the pH, but the most dramatic one is going to be sulfur. We can use ferrous sulfate sometimes when we need iron, and the sulfate can help. But often, a lot of our acidity that happens indirectly, because we are using acidifying fertilizers. And any fertilizer that has ammonium in it is an acidifying fertilizer. So some of these fertilizers that you need to be careful when you use it on acidic soils. But if you have an alkaline soil, you can take a chance to use it, because it's going to bring down the pH. You have like ammonium sulfate, ammonium nitrate, monoammonium phosphate, diammonium phosphate. And you notice the common word there is ammonium, because as ammonium moves from ammonium to nitrite and to nitrate, it releases 2 molecules of hydrogen. And remember, I said hydrogen is acidity, and the higher the concentration of hydrogen, the lower your pH, the more acid is your soil, okay? Urea is also can cause your soil to be acidic as well. So in maintaining the right pH, you can correct an alkaline soil, you can correct an acidic soil. Crop rotation, key. What crop rotation does, you kind of avoid using the same crop continuously for a variety of reasons. That crop may just have a particular feeding pattern that really just draws on a particular nutrient, and you create an imbalance. Just the presence of that crop for a long period of time encourage a particular kind of disease, right? So you rotate because your crop has heavy feeding characteristic. It's a shallow rooted crop. You rotate that with a deep crop. you rotate a legume with a non-legume, because that thing, the legume is going to bring nitrogen, the non-legume is going to use the nitrogen, and you come back again and you rotate in that cycle. Crops have different pest and disease profiles. So if you keep them there all the time, then they tend to be a pest buildup. As you rotate and change, you break that cycle. And I just have a generic explanation of an example of a rotation. You start with a legume, you go with a leafy vegetable like your cabbage, lettuce, your pak choy, Chinese cabbage. Then you go to a fruiting heavy feeder, like a tomato, a sweet pepper, eggplant or something so. Then you go to a root tuber, like a sweet potato, a carrot, and then you go to a cover crop. A cover crop is one that breaks the cycle. And these cover crops you can use, I think later on I have some slides on cover crops. And all of that are complementary to each other because they help each other, they leave residue of fertilizer that the others can use. But most of all, because they have different root systems, they tend to improve the soil, encourage a whole wider range of microorganisms in the soil, and generally improve the soil health. Okay, why a cover crop? Because that is a concept we don't practice much in the Caribbean. It avoids the land staying bare and unproductive. A cover crop is planted to protect and enrich the soil rather than to be harvested for food or profit. You just focus on the soil. You're not interested in the product that comes out. As a matter of fact, you are supposed to harvest the cover crop before it fruit. So if you have a legume as a cover crop, don't allow it to seed and become a legume. Shortly before it flowers, cut it and turn it down. So all the nitrogen is in the leaves. But if you cut it after it has sent the pod, most of that nitrogen has moved into the pod. Okay? Farmers and gardeners use them in between their regular planting season. As windbreaks and things of that nature. Cover crop. Oh, the benefits, you stop erosion, you add nutrients, you block weeds, and you fix soils that are hard. Compacted soils, because the roots from these cover crops go down and they break the tough soil and makes it more friable. Incorporate legumes. Legumes is important simply because it contributes nitrogen to the farming system. Through biological nitrogen fixation, they have nodules. The nodules have a bacteria called rhizobium. It captures nitrogen from the atmosphere, because that's the element we have the most abundant around us. 78% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. Yet we require nitrogen, so important for crop growth. But unless we transform that into a form, we cannot use it. But in the legumes, the rhizobium is taking it from the atmosphere. The plant is giving the rhizobium energy and is converting it into nitrate that the plant can use, right? So always incorporate a legume in your cropping system. Encourage beneficial microorganisms. Here again, the story of organic matter comes up. Healthy soils contain a diverse community of microorganisms, earthworms, and other organisms. Encourage them by maintaining soil organic matter. Reduce unnecessary pesticide application. Keep your soil covered. Avoid excessive tillage. Provide diverse plant residues. And use mature compost. And the reason why I say mature compost, if your compost is not fully mature, the CN ratio is not right, and you apply it to the soil, it tends to tie up the nitrogen in the soil for a while before it gives it to the plant. So ensure that your compost is mature. Prevent soil compaction. Straightforward, you don't drive machinery, you don't work the soil when it's wet. And livestock is one of the biggest problems when it comes to soil compaction. Cattle just treading on soil, particularly if it's wet, can destroy your soil structure and whatnot. So one has to be careful if you're doing grazing, how long you keep the animal on the pad and whatnot, okay? Manage water properly. Water is always key. So you do rainwater harvesting, you use drip irrigation where practical, because what drip irrigation is that it's very practical and and it's very economical in terms of the use of water. You're not wasting water. Okay, there's energy involved if you have to pump and whatnot, but it's a better practice. And sometimes if you can have gravity feed, the pressure based on the height that you go is enough to run drip lines, do that. So where you can use drip lines, use them. I think it's a better approach than sprinkler and these other types of irrigation. Mulch your soil because it prevents evaporation of water from the soil. Do contour drainage to control water. Have areas to gather overflow of water that it does not run uncontrolled. Have proper drains in your field. Because the objective is to prevent both water stress, that is not enough water, and prolong waterlogging. So one has to manage that water in such a way that it does not create any of these conditions. Integrate trees. Get trees into your production system. Either they're on the border, the in-between, trees that are deep-rooted. What they do, not only they break any compaction you have, but they create space and create conditions for water to move in. They also provide organic inputs. They involve in nutrient cycling, taking nutrients from deep down and bringing it back up as that happens in the forest. It improves the soil structure, and there's greater biodiversity. And we see the value of biodiversity in terms of having the organisms to ensure that the systems that ought to keep your soil healthy is working well. Manage fertilizer carefully. Now, good soil health doesn't mean that you don't use fertilizer. You need to manage it carefully. And it must be a balance of inorganic, which is some of these fertilizers you buy in the store, as well as your organic matter that you put in. Your soil test is going to guide you as to how best to do that. And there is a principle that is being promoted by the leaders in integrated plant nutrition. They call it the 4R principles. Get your right source of nutrients. So if you, for instance, want to add nitrogen, avoid the acidifying nitrogen fertilizers, right? So that's the right source. The right rate depends on what the plant requires for it to grow and give you an optimum yield, not any excess. There may be a little excess just to keep fertility levels, but sometimes we tend to over-fertilize, and that can be a problem in that we waste money, the economics of that, as well as it can damage your soil, right? And in the right rate, there's also understanding what approach you're going to take to fertilizing. Often we are using what I call the cookbook approach, a recipe that they say if you're doing cabbage, you use so many pounds per acre or how many grams per plant and whatnot. I think first you need to do a soil test, know your soil test, know how much nutrients are in the soil, what the plant needs, and the difference between the two is what you supply as fertilizer. We call that the mass balance approach. That is what we use for fertilizer. So that is important that you have your soil test. The right time, it has to be consistent with the phenology of the crop. There's no point applying fertilizer after the crop has seeded or it has already flowered or is sending fruit. That has to be done sometime before, when the plant is actually maximizing biomass and whatnot. Understand the crop, understand when the various things that you need are there, and apply the fertilizer at the right time. And the right place is where it is that you apply. There are several ways of applying fertilizer. You can broadcast, you can place in the soil, you can ban, you can fertigate, you put the fertilizer in the water and apply. Again, an assessment needs to be made at what resources you have. But respecting these 4 principles of fertilizer use often helps us not waste fertilizer, keep the environment fairly safe, and at the end of the day, don't waste money. I say use the mass balance approach for fertilizer application. Avoid excess nitrogen and phosphorus because these things tend to move and they end up in water systems and cause problems. Okay.
Mr.
Mani
Polius, I'm just going to step in really quickly. We're running a little bit over time, so I just wanted to
okay.
let you know it's about 8:16 right now. We're probably not going to get to any questions tonight, but I'm letting you know that we are running over our scheduled time.
Okay. What I can do, I can close down now, because what I have left is not much. You said you're not going to take any questions. Okay.
Probably not, no, because we are running so far over time.
Oh, my
I'd
apologies.
encourage our participants to hold on to your questions till the recap or next week, or feel free to email them. But yes.
Okay, so there's going to be a recap next week where I can participate.
No, the participants will have a recap session
Okay.
towards the end of the uh Ag-Cademy to kind of go over anything,
Okay.
but they
All
can
right.
hold on to their questions. They can email us if you're okay with them getting in
Yeah,
contact.
You
We'll
can
work that
send
out.
them to me, and I would respond to it. Okay.
Okay, great.
So I just want to close with this thing here. So your practical soil health management system. To start with, you test your soil, you plan what nutrients to apply, you maintain your soil cover, you add organic matter, you minimize tillage, you rotate crops, control erosion, manage water, prevent compaction, and you monitor your health. Thank you very much. My apologies. I somehow did not manage my time as best as I could. But like I said, if you have questions, you can send them to me. I can reply either by way of writing something to whoever needs an answer. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much. No worries about the timing. I totally get how that happens. It was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. For those of you who did have questions, we'll make sure to get Mr. Polius's email and we'll throw it in the chat in the Ag-Cademy group so that you can reach out with your question. But thank you all so much, and we'll see all of you guys on Thursday for our next session. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Mr. Polius.
Yeah, thank you very much. And my apologies for the overrun. I
No
really,
worries.
I really would have loved to interact a little bit with the group.
Yes,
Sorry
but we'll make
that
sure
this
that they
thing
get
was
your
just
contact. We'll make sure they get your contact.
okay. Yeah, so feel free. I will answer to any question that they ask.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have
Okay,
a great night.
have a great night all. Bye bye.